Hello and welcome to the Speaking Body Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Gorman. And today's episode of the podcast is once again a short solo episode of me talking directly to you. It is also going to be a continuation on the content that I put forward in the previous two episodes. Let's do a very short review of that content, going back 2 episodes. In that episode, I put forward an idea that psychoanalysis is a practice which is oriented by not knowing as opposed to being oriented by knowing. Another way to say this is that psychoanalysis is a practice that privileges what is unknown. And it privileges what is unknown because what is unknown produces a desire. It comes from a lack. When we don't know something, it's a lack of knowledge. And that lack of knowledge is something that we want to do something with. And what we want to do is find something out we want to learn. So my big claim there is that's the thing that orients psychoanalysis, is that desire to come to know something, to learn something that is currently not known, currently unknown. I contrasted that with a whole bunch of other different kinds of psychotherapies that I assume are available on the psychotherapeutic marketplace, which I said are more predicated on knowing things where the practitioner, the therapist, the doctor has knowledge, and what they do is they try to use that knowledge, be oriented by that knowledge in an attempt to assert something or make something happen. So I think there's a huge difference there. The episode after that, I compared the orientation of being oriented by what you don't know to science and to ethnography, which are 2 other practices that I said are different from psychoanalysis in a number of ways that are very important, but I think that they share a similar ethic. I think they share a similar orientation. I think all of those things, psychoanalysis, science, and ethnography, are about going to the edge, to the limit of what a person knows and finding something that they don't know, a question, a lack of knowledge, and then based off of that question, based off of that lack of knowledge, deciding what they're going to do. I thought that there's a real big similarity there. So that kind of catches you up with what I talked about in the previous 2 episodes. What I want to do today is sort of keep that going. And I want to make another distinction here. The distinction I want to focus on today is a distinction between judging on one hand and noticing on the other. I'm going to start with judging. I would say that judging is something that is very tied to knowing. When somebody comes in to my office, they could show up and they could say, this is why I'm here. And I could have a judgment of that, which is, okay, that's a good reason to be here. Or that's a bad reason to be here. Or, oh, that's something that's really, really significant and I absolutely need to take some corrective action in relation to it. Or that's something that's not a really big deal at all. I don't understand why it is that this person has even bothered making an appointment for something so small. All of these would be judgments. They would be me kind of jumping to a kind of conclusion saying, I know something or several things about why this person is here. I know many things based off of what they've told me. I think that judging/knowing in this way is something that kind of stops the process from happening. Now, I don't want to make it sound as though I'm superhuman or something other than I really am. I'm a normal human being. And of course, when somebody comes into my office, I do have judgments based off of what they say. However, when I'm practicing as a psychoanalyst, what I attempt to do is to not be super motivated by those judgments, not have those judgments be something that I think to myself, okay, yes, what I know/my judgment, that's very accurate. That's the thing that I should be trusting. I have my judgments. I do think things in relation to what people tell me, but I do my best to kind of put it off to the side and instead go towards this other thing, which I would call noticing. When I'm doing my job as a psychoanalyst well, what I think I'm doing is I'm listening to another person talk. And instead of judging what they say, I'm noticing what they say. Something they say strikes me as interesting, or I have a question about it, or whatever. I would notice that, and I would sometimes choose to notice things out loud. I would say, oh, that's kind of interesting. You talked about this thing twice. The first time you talked about it, I noticed that you said it's not that big a deal. And then the second time that you talked about it, you didn't say that. And I'm wondering if maybe it could be a bigger deal than you initially presented it. So that's a noticing. Now, this might seem very similar to judgment, and in some ways it is similar to judgment, but there is a difference here. In that second thing that I just said, the example that I tried to give you of noticing, the idea here is I don't know what's going to happen when I notice this. I'm not noticing that and sharing that out loud in an attempt to make something occur. I don't know what's going to happen when I notice something out loud. For example, if I notice an inconsistency in the way that a patient has spoken about something, and I choose to say that, I go, look, there, you said this at one point, you said that at another point, there's a difference there. Pointing that out to a person, noticing it out loud so that another person becomes more aware of it, you don't know how that's going to go. And I think that's the main difference. I would say that when people are judging, what they'll probably do is they'll probably want something to happen. They'll probably want to say to the patient, look, you said it this way at point A, you said it that way at point B. There's a difference. I want you to pick which one of those two things is true, A or B. That's trying to make something happen. That's trying to make the patient make a choice. That is, I think, fundamentally different than noticing something and then that's it, right? You don't know what's going to happen, and you're not trying to make the patient make a choice. You're just seeing how they're going to respond to you noticing the thing that you notice. When we notice something and we're noticing from a position of not knowing, what we're doing is not trying to prove a point or convince somebody of a particular thing that we believe. What we're doing is we're proposing something to see what happens when we propose it. Again, we don't know what that might provoke in the person who hears it. And we're very interested in learning what happens when we notice these things. Let me give you a more specific clinical example here. Somebody comes in and they tell you that they're trying really hard to not procrastinate on a variety of different things. They tell you this in multiple instances across different sessions. We could say this goes on for weeks, for months, even for years. Now, you could judge that. The judgment could take many forms. I'm just going to give it one here. This person is being dishonest with themselves. They're saying that they want to stop procrastinating, but clearly that's not true because they never stop procrastinating. I could give voice to that judgment and I could say to the patient, look, you've said this for weeks, for months, for years. At this point, this just isn't true. You really don't want to quit procrastinating. If you wanted to quit procrastinating, if you really wanted to, you would have done it. You just don't want to. That's a judgment, is what I'm saying. Or it could be a judgment. Now, what happens if we do this a slightly different way? If you say something along the lines of, hey, look, I've been talking to you for however many times, weeks, months, years, and this comes up a lot. You talk about trying really hard to not procrastinate. And yet it seems to me that no matter how many times you say that, you find a way to continue procrastinating. I don't know how a person's going to react to that. The only way to find out is to give voice to it in the way that I just did or a way that's similar to it and seeing what happens as a result of that. The difference here is that in the first example, I'm trying to make something happen. I want the patient to have an epiphany. I want them to have an insight. I want them to realize something about themselves. I want them to realize that what they're saying is incongruent with what's actually happening. That's me wanting to make something happen. The second way is not me trying to make something happen. I'm saying something, and I'm sure that something will happen in response to it. I just don't know what is going to happen in response to it, and I would like to find out what happens in response to it. Now, that second way that I described is admittedly a lot less curt, a lot less short, harsh than the first way. So let's stick with this a little bit, and let's give a different example, which might be a little bit more forceful, but still within the realm of noticing. The same example, a person says, I'm trying really hard to stop procrastinating, but they keep procrastinating. I could say to the person, look, you have said this for weeks, for months, for years, again and again and again. And really, it's interesting to me that nothing changes, period. Again, now I don't know how a person's going to respond to that. And maybe that sounds a lot like a judgment. Maybe it is a judgment and I'm just deluding myself. To me, the difference, it comes on the side of the psychoanalyst or the psychotherapist. If the therapist or the analyst is trying to make something happen, if they're trying to assert something, if they're trying to educate the patient, i.e. get the patient to realize something, then that, I'm saying, is on the side of knowing and judging. If the therapist or the analyst is sharing something that they've noticed and they really don't know what's going to happen as a result of that, that I would say is on the side of not knowing. Another way to think about this shift is this is a shift from wanting to know what is correct and then assert that in different ways to going, I've noticed a thing, but I don't know exactly what will happen when I share it. Another way to say this is I go from trying to say X, Y, and Z are right and correct to saying, what do X, Y, and Z do? They're different in this way. So that, I think, kind of illustrates what I was trying to talk about today. This episode's a little bit different than the previous episodes. I'm in a bit of a rush to get it out. And so I didn't spend as much time scripting the episode as I did the previous two. I'm kind of interested to hear what you all think about the difference here. I would love to hear from you. You can get in touch with me by going to speakingbody.substack.com. You'll find different ways that you can get in contact with me there. You can send me a message. My email address is there. Let's wrap this thing up here. So psychoanalysis, what we've been talking about here is what makes it distinct, what makes it unique, what makes it what it is. My claim is that psychoanalysis is this practice of noticing things, but you don't know what's going to happen when you notice them. You want to learn what will happen when you notice them. You, of course, know things as a psychoanalyst, but you're not trying to take what you know and prove it. You're not trying to assert it. You're kind of using it, but then you go to the edge of it and you find something that is interesting to you because you are unsure about it. You're unclear about it. You don't know something about it. That's great. When you're operating in that way, you're operating psychoanalytically. All right. I think that's it for me today. I want to wrap this up here today by saying thank you very, very much for taking the time to listen to this podcast or watch this podcast if you're watching the video. Your time and attention is super valuable. The fact that you've given it to me is something which is greatly appreciated. If you want to support the show in other ways other than giving it your time and attention, you can give me a review, a star rating. You can tell a friend about it. All of those things are super significant as well. And of course, if you want to support the show financially to help me offset the costs that I incur in producing the show, getting the equipment to make the show, the hosting, that sort of stuff, you can become a paid subscriber over at that website, speakingbody.substack.com. That's it. Till the next time I am in your ears, I hope that you take care and have fun doing the various things and stuff that you do.